it's Jen for Tested, here today with a miniatures project. So one of my favorite things about being a maker, apart from the actual making of things, is making things for other people. I get so much joy out of creating something, especially for someone I care about, and seeing their reaction when they open the box. That warm and fuzzy feeling has been pretty hard to come by this year, so I am dishing out all the handmade gifts I can think of. I am running short on time to make things completely from scratch, so I thought I'd work on something I already started. So earlier this year, I designed a booknook kit. If you're not familiar with a booknook, it's basically a narrow format diorama that fits inside a bookshelf, and you can put lights and little scenery inside. We really love them here at Tested. Norm worked on a Star Wars themed one, and I worked on a Narnia themed one. And I started off by just figuring out the basic form factor of the booknook. So it's essentially a box with a narrow area inside to build out your scene. There's some hidden compartments on the sides where you can embed all of your electronics. There's fake book spines on the front, and the two halves of the box come apart so you can easily access the inside to build out your scene. So from there, I added some features and I made this wardrobe version. So it looks like a coat closet, but if you look beyond the coats turn into trees, and the trees open up into this snowy forest scene at the back. Now, this kit started off as unfinished birch plywood, essentially a blank canvas. So today I want to go through how I fully decorated and finished this kit to really take it to the next level. I used some paint and stain, but I also got a couple of other fun things. I have some fabric to wrap the tiny coats. I got some miniature trees. I have some model snow to dust the forest scene. I think this is going to make a really cool gift, and I love miniatures, so this was a ton of fun to build. If you want to follow along, both these kits are available online. I got some help with the laser cutting from Travis at Abe Design. So there is a limited run of physical kits available, but I also put up the digital files. So if you have access to a laser cutter, you can download the files and cut the pieces yourself. So without further ado, let's build a booknook. So all of the kit pieces come on these sheet layouts. I've already gone through and popped everything out and sanded all of the edges to get rid of any splinters. And I know that some of these pieces I want to paint, and others that are meant to look like wood I'm just going to stain. But before I do that, I want to sand off the surface just to get rid of any of the scorch marks from the laser cutter and also get a nice smooth surface. What I'm doing right now is just wiping down all the pieces before I stain them with a tack cloth. This is just a sticky rag, and it pulls all of those fine sanding particles off the surface of the wood so there's no debris on it when I apply the stain. This stain that I'm using is a really rich, kind of dark walnut, and it's a pretty thick stain, so this is going to go on almost like paint, and I want to make sure to cover all of the edges and the whole surface, and then as soon as I'm done with that, I'm going to wipe it off so that it doesn't penetrate too much. So yeah, just making sure to get all of these edges, all these little details. So you'll have to look at the directions on whatever particular stain that you choose. They're all different. Sometimes the stain wants to sit on the surface for a little while before you wipe it. This is a really penetrating stain, so I don't really want it to sit for too long because I want to still be able to see that wood grain. So I'm basically just applying it and then wiping it off right away so that I don't completely get full saturation. And I did a little stain test. So I took some scrap pieces of my birch, sanded them down so I know exactly what the finish is going to look like, and then I applied basically every stain I have in my stain library to see what would look best on this. And I ended up picking this dark walnut. I really like this. It's kind of a rich, warm brown. It's not too dark, but it still feels substantial. So I think I'm going to use this on the wardrobe pieces, and I might go with a slightly lighter shade of either mission oak or red oak for those tree pieces on the outside. I set all of the wood pieces outside so the stain can dry overnight, and before I turn in, I want to do a little bit of prep work on some of these scenery pieces so they're also ready for tomorrow. the first thing I'm going to do is to glue some of these stack ups. A few of these are multi-layer sections. So the lamppost piece here, this is D1, 2, and 3. I've also got 2 C sections and 2 E sections for the snow. And I'm going to attach these with some super glue. This is just CA glue. So I'll line them up. I'm just going to put some glue on the back here. And then alignment is super critical with this whole build because the tolerances are pretty tight. So I'm just using my work surface to make sure that everything stays nice and flush. I'm pressing it all together. You can even use some spray accelerator. Set that up. And then I'll do the other snow sections. So this is, let's see, E1 and E2. So where these little slots are, these are going to get some trees, so that'll be in the back. So this is the piece that gets the glue. So we've got all these pieces glued up. A and B are singular pieces, then I've got C, D, and E. And you can kind of see how that will layer inside the diorama. They're not all right on top of each other. There's a little bit of space in between, but it gives you that kind of pull into the scene. You're looking up into the snowdrifts. So the next thing I want to do with the snow pieces is to add a little bit of texture. Right now they're just flat surfaces and I could paint them, but I think I can do better than that. So I'm going to use hot glue to make some kind of like snow drifts and drips on the surface before I even apply paint, just to give them a little bit more dimension. So I'm just like dripping glue on the top. There's no exact science to this. I'm just making it look kind of organic and like blobs. I don't want it to be too drippy because they're not icicles. It's more like snow has fallen and drifted. So I'm going to probably do a little bit of layering with the glue. I find it's always handy to have tweezers around when you're working with hot glue to pull out, I call them spider webs, all these little glue threads. Because once you apply paint, those will look pretty nasty. So I'm just gonna pull them out. Once the glue is hardened, it's easier to separate them. Just kind of tweeze those all out of the way. And I want to be really careful not to interfere with the assembly of this whole piece. So the tabs on the bottom here and on the side, I know this piece is going to connect with the wall on both sides and then on the bottom. So I want to make sure I'm not letting glue ooze over onto any of the places where it's going to interfere with the pieces connecting. I don't need to worry too much about this lower area because I know I'm going to have another piece that falls in front of this, so you won't really see the bottom at all. One thing I do want to do is I want to add some like snow that's accumulated up on the sides of the lamppost here, kind of like when the wind blows the snow into drifts up against things. Yeah, I think that'll look really good. So I'm just making sure that all of the edges, all of the sharp edges of the wood pieces are all covered so that it looks nice and soft. Shouldn't be pointy anywhere. It's snow, so it should be nice and soft and drifty. So I'm just rounding over all of the edges of the plywood and making sure to avoid all of the tabs and all of the edges that will face either of the walls. So basically I'm avoiding the left and right sides, I'm avoiding the bottom straight edge. It's this top curve here that I'm sort of rounding over and softening. For the tree pieces, I'm thinking of doing kind of like a watercolor treatment, at least as a base coat. I think that'll give it a lot of like that tufty kind of wavy look that the big boughs of pine trees have. I don't know, it's just a thought. But I want to match the color of these little bitty trees. So these are the three-dimensional trees I'm going to use in the scene. These are so adorable. I can't even stand how cute they are. But they're not really green. Like they almost read as black. I don't want to use black completely, but I think that they do need to be pretty dark for them to sort of blend into the scene. And these trees will be in the foreground, and then these smaller trees will fit into the snow sections kind of behind them. So you can picture how this is going to layer. You'll be looking at these little trees through the larger trees in the foreground of the scene. So I think I want to start off with a little bit of green and a little bit of black. And I want to do kind of a sort of a wet on wet technique for this. So I'm just going to get a little bit of water in one of the wells here. I'm just going to experiment a little bit because I want to see what happens. Yeah, I almost think I need to do like a wash first. All right, I don't know if you can see this. It's probably going to run if I hold it up, but you see how that has kind of a dimensional look to it? I just really like the way that looks. I'm not sure how it'll read once it's dry and when I've added snow and other stuff on top of it, but I really like that as a base coat. Because this is a dark wintry forest. And they are evergreens, so that's kind of counterintuitive, but I don't think they should actually be green. All right, all of the pieces have been set out to dry overnight. Everything has a first coat on it, so I'm feeling pretty good about where I'm at with things. I will also have you know, I managed to paint in green and black and dark walnut stain without getting any on my white shirt. You might say I'm a professional. Anyway, I think I'm gonna call it a night, but I will see you tomorrow. Today I get to dig into all the fun details. So I already have a base texture on the snow pieces, and I've got a wash on the trees. This came out so well. And I want to do a dusting of snow on everything. So I'm going to start off with white acrylic paint and some craft glue. I think the mixture of the two of these will give me a nice opaque coverage, but also a little bit of adhesion, so the snow has something to stick to. I got two different kinds of snow. So I have this first kind is battlefield snow, and it's sort of like a white sand. It's very opaque and it has kind of a gritty texture. So I think that'll make a good base layer. And then on top of it, I'm gonna add some of this other kind, which is it's sort of a fluffy powder. I'll show you this up close. It has iridescent flecks in it, so I think that'll have some nice sparkle and it'll be good for the drifts of snow. So before I apply these, I'm gonna mix up some of that glue and paint and get a base layer on everything, and then I'll start with a little bit of dusting and sprinkling. I just thought of one quick thing I want to do first. So I'm going to give a quick base coat to this lamppost so that can dry before I start applying layers of snow on top. It turns out that nail polish, if you're on a budget and you don't want to buy expensive enamel paints, you can sometimes find cheap nail polish at the drugstore on sale for a couple bucks, and they make great model paints. You know, it's not like professional quality or anything, but for something like this will totally do the trick. All right, so let's mix up some of this paint and glue concoction. I'm just going for like a 50-50 mix here. I don't know how opaque that will be, but we can apply it and find out. We'll see when it dries how this actually looks. Okay. So what I want to do is kind of model the snow dusting on these trees after the miniature ones, because I like the way that these look, and I want it to look like a uniform forest. So I'm going to try to go in here and thinking about the way that the snow will fall. So it's like, get a nice thick amount on the brush, and then just kind of, and I'm kind of like dabbing it on. I'm doing a little like Bob Ross action here, getting some happy little trees. And it's okay if the paint goes on kind of thick because that will just help with the effect. I'm also going to get some on the top edges there. All right, so while that is still wet, I'm gonna set up a little snow dusting station so that I can dust the snow on, but also collect all of the sort of runoff so that I don't lose any. All right, I think that looks kind of great. So I'm gonna keep going with the rest of these trees, and I think once this dries, then I'll go back in with some more glue to add that thicker, fluffier snow. So I've started, it seems like the best technique for applying this powdery snow is to kind of dab in some of the craft glue and kind of just stipple it on pretty thick. And then I'm going in and just sort of sprinkling and patting in some of this powder stuff. It's kind of fibrous. It almost reminds me a little bit of like dryer lint. It has a sort of a fuzzy quality, but it does read really well, and it has much more dimension than the grainy stuff. So it's definitely adding a little bit of that dimension that I was looking for. I don't know if you can see that, but I think it'll read. It's hard to tell how it's going to look inside when it's sort of moonlit and dark, but I think every little bit helps. Oh yeah, I'm getting some of those little flecks glittering in there, hoping that'll pick up the flickering lamplight. That's one thing I really miss about the East Coast. I grew up there my whole life, and I moved out to California last year, and there's no snow in the Bay Area. So this little forest scene is kind of I don't know, it's kind of an escape into nostalgia and remembering snow days in my childhood. But I just really love that magical feeling when there's a fresh snow on the ground and it's nighttime and the moon's out. Yeah, the scene hopefully will capture that magic. I really like the way that wet on wet technique worked for the trees. So I'm gonna try to emulate that here. And wet on wet is basically just, I think it's like a watercolor technique, but instead of applying paint to a dry surface, you sort of wet the whole surface or areas where you want the paint to bleed, and then you can kind of blot pigment into the areas that are already wet, and instead of having hard lines, it'll kind of bleed and run out into wherever the boundaries of the water are, and you'll get these really nice kind of gradients and blending, and it's a very fluid look. And I don't typically think about doing wet on wet with acrylic, but it turned out really nicely. Another thing to remember about perspective, in addition to scale, is as things fade out into the distance, because of the way that your eye works and also because of all the atmosphere in between the foreground and the background, you start to lose detail. So the background of the layout is it's a little more out of focus. It's partly maybe there's mist, maybe there's some haze or fog in the air, so that could be contributing to it, but it's also just the distance itself and the way that the light refracts and the way that your eye is seeing it. So none of these edges, I'm not painting, zigzag trees. I'll just get touch some little points to allude to the fact that there's, the top of a coniferous forest back there, but it's not going to be anything sharp. There's no sharp edges far out on the horizon. I don't know. What do you think? Does it look like you're looking into a faraway forest? I think it kind of reads. I'll see how it looks when it dries too, because I can always. The trick with wet on wet is there is a point when you can't keep painting back into it because it'll just get muddy because everything is wet. So it'll bleed, all the colors will bleed into each other. So I think I'm almost at that point. I'm gonna let this dry for a little bit, let those layers kind of sink in, and then I can go back and layer on top of that and sort of pull highlights or shadows. But I wanna keep the sort of patterns that I've laid out intact without getting too much bleed. So I'm gonna just let that be. And in the meantime, I can focus on the sky. So behind this, there will be some sky. And actually, let me mark out exactly. Yeah, if I get to there, that should be good. I think what I want for the sky is like a steel gray. So I'm gonna go for a tiny, tiny dab of blue, just a touch. And more white. Ooh, definitely more white. So I'm going for a little bit more definition, I think, than you'd usually see in a winter sky, because I'm picturing it's usually pretty flat. It's usually mostly one tone, it's really diffuse light, and it's almost completely flat. You don't typically see big tufty clouds or anything like that. But I want to go for a little bit more drama. So again, I'm gonna take some liberties with nature and go for a little bit more of a dramatic sky. I finished the doors. So I glued all the pieces together and I got a little carried away and weathered them. I usually save that till the last step, but I was having so much fun I couldn't help myself. It might seem a little counterintuitive to rough these up right after I put some really nice stain on there, but if you know anything about this channel, you know no piece is complete until it's been properly weathered. And this wardrobe is probably hundreds of years old, so it's gotta look lived in and loved and antique. So I went in with a sanding stick and roughed up some of the edges to give some highlights and pull out a little bit of that detail. And then I went in with a dry brush and dabbed in some black and brown paint to add a little bit of age and grime, especially in places where doors usually get dirty. You know how around door handles you'll get those grimy fingerprints. So I put some there and maybe a little bit at the bottom if people's feet have bumped into it. And I applied that to both sides because you'll see these on the inside of the diorama. And I feel like, I don't know, it might be hard to tell on camera, but to my eye, they look pretty dirty. They look like they have a story to tell. So I'm pretty happy with these, and I'm ready to move on to sort of the final decoration step. I finished the doors, so I glued all the pieces together, and I got a little carried away and weathered them. I usually save that for the last step, but I was having so much fun I couldn't help myself. It might seem a little counterintuitive to rough these up right after I've applied some really nice stain, but if you know anything about this channel, you know no piece is complete until it's been properly weathered. And this wardrobe is probably hundreds of years old, so it's gotta look lived in and loved and antique. So I went in with a sanding stick and scuffed up some of the edges to pull out a couple highlights. Then I went in with a dry brush and dabbed in some black and brown paint to add a little bit of age and some grime, especially in places where doors usually get dirty. So you know how around door handles you'll get those grimy handprints and also some around the bottom. And I did that on both sides because you'll see these when you open the diorama. And I feel, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but to my eye, these look pretty worn and they look like they have a story to tell. Today is the day I get to make tiny coats. So I thought about painting these, but then I had a better idea. I went to the fabric store and I dug through their cutoff bin. Most fabric stores have one, and the scraps are usually free or very cheap. So I was looking for any type of warm, cozy coat material. I found some tweed, I got felt, I found some corduroy, velvet, some upholstery fabric, and you don't need a lot. A little bit goes a long way because there's not a lot of surface area to cover. I'm not going to sew these, I'm not crazy, but I think if I cut and glue and sort of layer the material on, I'll be able to make some pretty convincing pieces. So when you open the wardrobe, the first thing you'll see when you peek inside are these rows of fuzzy miniature coats. I think it's going to look awesome. So the first thing I want to do is lay out all the pieces and kind of decide which coats get which fabric. And they all have a slightly different styles. Some of them are definitely like sort of trench business type coats. There's definitely a furry sort of glamorous coat. There's a smaller children's coat. So I'm gonna sort of just go through what I have and decide who gets what fabric. So I think for the kids' coat, for this little short coat, I really want to do this bright red felt. I think this would look really cute for a kid's coat. So that's first. So then I probably want something a little darker. Yeah, what about, maybe not denim, but what about the back side, the reverse side of the denim? Ooh, I could do like a contrasting collar. I could do like a fuzzy, yeah, we'll do a fuzzy trim on this one. So that'll be that coat. Ooh, this one's just calling out for corduroy. So that's where I'll do the brown. Now, one of the tricks with this is when you're making miniatures, and I'm certainly not an expert, but I think that something like a print would technically need to scale down. So this is, this is a full-scale upholstery print. It might read a little strange to do on a tiny object. However, if it's really cropped in, it may just read as sort of abstract something, and it's not going to be as visible because it'll be behind the other one. So I might try this and see. Strictly speaking, it's way too big. The scale of the print is way too big for a miniature, but I might break some of the rules. Okay, so I've got them all picked out. I'm going to trace out, I've got to figure out how I want to do this. I'm going to trace out the silhouette and start cutting and gluing into place. And this is not at all like making an actual garment pattern because I'm essentially just wrapping it. I'm just going to wrap around the back. So I don't need to worry about a separate, I guess it's sort of like patterning a garment. I need like a base body structure, and then I'll layer on top of that with a sleeve and maybe a collar, maybe a little notch for like a pocket or a sleeve cuff. So I guess there's some similarities, but I'm certainly not making tiny garment patterns. So my method here is I'm just tracing about maybe a ½ inch border around the silhouette of the coat just to get started with the base piece, and then I'll layer on top of that with the other sections. But I figure that'll give me enough to sort of wrap around the back and glue behind so you don't see any of the seam. And again, I'm lining this up in such a way so that the edge of the fabric is flush with the side of the coat, with the flat side, so I'm not getting any overlap. So you can see, yeah, you can see the tabs have plenty of room, and that'll go right up to the side of the wall, and you won't be able to see that seam. I think I might do something a little different with this one. I want to get more of like a gathered look instead of having the flat surface. So I'm gonna sort of like pleat the corduroy on top, if that makes any sense. So I'm just gluing down a section along that side edge. And then yeah, I think that looks kind of good. Look at that little one. That one's cool. I like that one. Again, the texture, the scale of the texture, like this wouldn't even be corduroy. This would be some, I don't know, some kind of ridged fur or something maybe, but I think it still reads, even though we know that it's very, very oversized corduroy. Okay, who's up next? It's just about time for the final assembly. So I finished all the tiny coats. Check these out. Look how cute they are. I love the way these turned out. I also painted a snow effect on the floor of the wardrobe, so there's sort of a transition from the real world into the snowy forest. I wired up the LED inside the lamppost, so there's a flickering yellow LED in there. And I've got a trick, it's sort of my secret for making flames. I use this iridescent plastic raffia, sort of a crinkly, translucent sheet material. And I've had this bundle, this particular bundle of raffia for about 20 years. I'm not exaggerating. My mom had this laying around as gift wrap and I thought it looked like fire, so I've been using this to make flames in dioramas since I was a little kid. I just use a little bit at a time. You can see I've made it last. But I'll tuck it inside the enclosure in front of the light source. And it sort of just diffuses and refracts the light so you don't see the actual shape of the LED, you just get that dancing flame effect. I'll show you when this is plugged in later, it looks really cool. I also have the miniature trees. I pulled out all of the LEDs and electronics, so these are ready to go. And I grabbed all the wood pieces that I stained earlier. So everything is ready to assemble. I'm gonna dry fit it all first, and as long as everything fits, I'm ready to start gluing. I think, let's see, first order of business is, there is an order of operations. There's actually a very specific order of operations to make sure that all the tabs and slots will fit without too much effort. So I think I'll start off actually with the right wall. And I know that the coats go in first, so the first 4 slots are coats, but the coats don't interfere with anything else, they just go into the wall, so I'm gonna hold off on those for the time being. The next piece that attaches to the actual wall is this tree section. So the tree goes in here. Oh, right, this way. This is the front. So this is the tree. And then I've got the short tree. And the longer tree. And then 2 short snow pieces, and then these ones fit into the wall. So I've got C, D, and E. Yeah, okay. Then my castle and sky. Look at those. Look at those. That goes in like that. And that slides in behind it. And that'll actually be easier to put on once I attach this. So that looks good. I think I'm ready to glue. This is it. This is the moment of truth. So I wired in all the LEDs, and there's a little micro limit switch at the front that's actuated by the doors. So when the book nook is closed, the lights should go off, and when the doors are opened, if I've wired everything correctly, the lights should come on. So let's see if it's working. Ready? Ah! Oh, that looks so good. It's so cute and cozy in there. And those iridescent flecks in the snow? Perfect. I haven't seen the full effect with the coats and the trays and the lights. It really captures that cozy forest scene. Well, hopefully this has inspired you to work on some handmade holiday gifts this year, perhaps a diorama, maybe even a book nook. If you want to grab either of these kits, they are both available on my Etsy. If you want one though, make sure to act fast because they sold out really quickly last time. I'm not sure when I'll be making these again. In the meantime, good luck with all of your holiday crafting and gifting. Happy holidays, and I'll see you next time.